Welcome to Antrix Media, your one-stop shop for all things kind of information. Today, we're going to talk about the attack on Pearl Harbor. The attack on Pearl Harbor was a surprise military strike by the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service upon the United States against the naval base at Pearl Harbor in Honolulu, Territory of Hawaii, just before 8 a.m., local time, on Sunday, December 7, 1941. The United States was a neutral country at the time. The attack led to its formal entry into World War II the next day. The base was attacked by 353 Imperial Japanese aircraft, including fighters, level and dive bombers, and torpedo bombers, in 2 waves, launched from 6 aircraft carriers. All but USS Arizona were later raised, and 6 were returned to service and went on to fight in the war. The Japanese also sank or damaged 3 cruisers, 3 destroyers, an anti-aircraft training ship, and 1 minor layer. Chapter 1, Diplomacy. War between Japan and the United States had been a possibility that each nation had been aware of, and planned for, since the 1920s. Tensions did not seriously grow until Japan's invasion of Manchuria in 1931. Over the next decade, Japan expanded into China, leading to the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1937. Chapter 2, Military Planning. Preliminary planning for an attack on Pearl Harbor to protect the move into the southern resource area, the Japanese term for the Dutch East Indies and Southeast Asia generally, had begun very early in 1941 under the auspices of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, then commanding Japan's combined fleet. Over the next several months, pilots were trained, equipment was adapted, and intelligence was collected. Despite these preparations, Emperor Hirohito did not approve the attack plan until November 5, after the third of 4 imperial conferences called to consider the matter. Final authorization was not given by the emperor until December 1, after a majority of Japanese leaders advised him the Hull Note would destroy the fruits of the China incident, endanger Manchukuo and undermine Japanese control of Korea. While U.S. Pacific bases and facilities had been placed on alert on many occasions, U.S. officials doubted Pearl Harbor would be the first target. Instead, they expected the Philippines would be attacked first. Chapter 3, Objectives. The Japanese attack had several major aims. First, it intended to destroy important American fleet units, thereby preventing the Pacific Fleet from interfering with the Japanese conquest of the Dutch East Indies and Malaya and enabling Japan to conquer Southeast Asia without interference. Second, it was hoped to buy time for Japan to consolidate its position and increase its naval strength before shipbuilding authorized by the 1940 Vinson-Walsh Act erased any chance of victory. Third, to deliver a blow to America's ability to mobilize its forces in the Pacific, battleships were chosen as the main targets, since they were the prestige ships of any navy at the time. Finally, it was hoped that the attack would undermine American morale such that the U.S. government would drop its demands contrary to Japanese interests and would seek a compromise peace with Japan. Chapter 4, Approach and Attack Strategy. On November 26, 1941, a Japanese task force, the Striking Force, of 6 aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, and Zuikaku, departed Hitokapu Bay on Kasuga, now Itarup Island in the Kuril Islands, en route to a position northwest of Hawaii, intending to launch its 408 aircraft to attack Pearl Harbor, 360 for the 2 attack waves and 48 on Defensive Combat Air Patrol, CAP, including 9 fighters from the first wave. The first wave was to be the primary attack, while the second wave was to attack carriers as its first objective and cruisers as its second, with battleships as the third target. The first wave carried most of the weapons to attack capital ships, mainly specially adapted Type 91 aerial torpedoes which were designed with an anti-roll mechanism and a rudder extension that let them operate in shallow water. The air crews were ordered to select the highest value targets, battleships and aircraft carriers, or, if these were not present, any other high-value ships, cruisers and destroyers. First wave dive bombers were to attack ground targets. Fighters were ordered to strafe and destroy as many parked aircraft as possible to ensure they did not get into the air to intercept the bombers, especially in the first wave. Fleet submarines I-16, I-18, I-20, I-22, and I-24 each embarked a Type A midget submarine for transport to the waters off Oahu. The 5 I-boats left Kure Naval District on November 25, 1941. On December 6, they came to within 10 nautical miles, 19 kilometers, 12 miles, of the mouth of Pearl Harbor and launched their midget subs at about 1 o'clock local time on December 7. At 3:42 Hawaiian time, the minesweeper Condor spotted a midget submarine periscope southwest of the Pearl Harbor entrance buoy and alerted the destroyer Ward. However, Ward sank another midget submarine at 6:37 in the first American shots in the Pacific Theater. Chapter 5, Japanese Declaration of War. The attack took place before any formal declaration of war was made by Japan, but this was not Admiral Yamamoto's intention. He originally stipulated that the attack should not commence until 30 minutes after Japan had informed the United States that peace negotiations were at an end. However, the attack began before the notice could be delivered. Tokyo transmitted the 5,000-word notification, commonly called the 14-part message, in 2 blocks to the Japanese embassy in Washington. Transcribing the message took too long for the Japanese ambassador to deliver it at 1 p.m. Washington time, as ordered. In the event, it was not presented until more than an hour after the attack began. In fact, U.S. codebreakers had already deciphered and translated most of the message hours before he was scheduled to deliver it. The final part is sometimes described as a declaration of war. While it was viewed by a number of senior U.S. government and military officials as a very strong indicator negotiations were likely to be terminated and that war might break out at any moment, it neither declared war nor severed diplomatic relations. A declaration of war was printed on the front page of Japan's newspapers in the evening edition of December 8, late December 7 in the U.S., but not delivered to the U.S. government until the day after the attack. Chapter 6, First Wave of Attack. The first attack wave of 183 planes was launched north of Oahu, led by Commander Mitsuo Fuchida. 6 planes failed to launch due to technical difficulties. The first attack included 3 groups of planes. The Japanese attacked in 2 waves. The first wave was detected by United States Army radar at 136 nautical miles, 252 kilometers, but was misidentified as United States Army Air Force's bombers arriving from the American mainland. 3. First Air Fleet. First group, targets, battleships and aircraft carriers. 49 Nakajima B-5N Kate bombers armed with 800 kg, 1,760 pounds, armor-piercing bombs, organized in 4 sections. 1 failed to launch. 40 B-5N bombers armed with Type 91 torpedoes, also in 4 sections. Second group targets, Fort Island and Wheeler Field. 51 Aichi DEA Valdive bombers armed with 550 pounds, 249 kilograms, general-purpose bombs, 3 failed to launch. Third group, targets, aircraft at Fort Island, Hickam Field, Wheeler Field, Barbers Point, Kaneohe. 43 Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters for air control and strafing, 2 failed to launch. As the first wave approached Oahu, it was detected by the U.S. Army SCR-270 radar at Opana Point near the island's northern tip. This post had been in training mode for months, but was not yet operational. The operators, Privates George Elliott Jr. and Joseph Lockhart, reported a target to Private Joseph P. McDonald, a private stationed at Fort Shafter's Intercept Center near Pearl Harbor. But Lieutenant Kermit A. Tyler, a newly assigned officer at the thinly manned Intercept Center, presumed it was the scheduled arrival of 6 B-17 bombers from California. The Japanese planes were approaching from a direction very close, only a few degrees difference, to the bombers, and while the operators had never seen a formation as large on radar, they neglected to tell Tyler of its size. Tyler, for security reasons, could not tell the operators of the 6 B-17s that were due, even though it was widely known. Chapter 7, Second Wave of Attack. The second planned wave consisted of 171 planes, 54 B-5NS, 81 DEAs, and 36 A-6MS, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Shigekazu Shimazaki. This wave and its targets also comprised 3 groups of planes. First group, 54 B-5NS armed with 550 pounds, 249 kilograms, and 132 pounds, 60 kilograms, general-purpose bombs. Second group, targets, aircraft carriers and cruisers. Third group, targets, aircraft at Fort Island, Hickam Field, Wheeler Field, Barbers Point, Kaneohe. 35 A-6MS for defense and strafing, 1 aborted. The second wave was divided into 3 groups. The separate sections arrived at the attack point almost simultaneously from several directions. Chapter 7, American Casualties and Damage. 90 minutes after it began, the attack was over. 2,008 sailors were killed and 710 others wounded, 218 soldiers and airmen, who were part of the Army prior to the independent United States Air Force in 1947, were killed and 364 wounded, 109 Marines were killed and 69 wounded, and 68 civilians were killed and 35 wounded. In total, 2,403 Americans were killed, and 1,143 were wounded. 18 ships were sunk or run aground, including 5 battleships. All of the Americans killed or wounded during the attack were legally non-combatants, given that there was no state of war when the attack occurred. Of the American fatalities, nearly half were due to the explosion of Arizona's forward magazine after it was hit by a modified 16-inch, 410mm, shell. She was targeted by many Japanese bombers as she got underway and sustained more hits from 250 pounds, 113 kilograms, bombs, which started further fires. Of the 402 American aircraft in Hawaii, 188 were destroyed and 159 damaged, 155 of them on the ground. Almost none were actually ready to take off to defend the base. 8 Army Air Forces pilots managed to get airborne during the attack, and 6 were credited with downing at least one Japanese aircraft during the attack. First Lieutenant Lewis M. Sanders, Second Lieutenant Philip M. Rasmussen, Second Lieutenant Kenneth M. Taylor, Second Lieutenant George S. Welch, Second Lieutenant Harry W. Brown, and Second Lieutenant Gordon H. Sterling Jr. of 33 PBYs in Hawaii. 30 were destroyed and 3 on patrol at the time of the attack returned undamaged. Friendly fire brought down some U.S. planes on top of that, including 4 from an inbound flight from Enterprise. Chapter 8, Japanese Losses. 55 Japanese airmen and 9 submariners were killed in the attack, and 1, Kazuo Sakamaki, was captured. Of Japan's 414 available planes, 350 took part in the raid, in which 29 were lost, 9 in the first wave, 3 fighters, 1 dive bomber, and 5 torpedo bombers, and 20 in the second wave, 6 fighters and 14 dive bombers, with another 74 damaged by anti-aircraft fire from the ground. Chapter 9, American Losses. 21 American ships were damaged or lost in the attack, of which all but 3 were repaired and returned to service. Arizona, Rear Admiral Isaac C. Kidd's flagship of Battleship Division 1, hit by 4 armor-piercing bombs, exploded, total loss, not salvaged. 1,177 dead. Oklahoma, hit by 5 torpedoes, capsized, total loss, salvaged and scrapped. 429 dead. West Virginia, hit by 2 bombs, 7 torpedoes, sunk, returned to service July 1944. California, hit by 2 bombs, 2 torpedoes, sunk, returned to service January 1944. Nevada, hit by 6 bombs, 1 torpedo, beached, returned to service October 1942. Pennsylvania, Admiral Husband E. Kimmel's flagship of the United States Pacific Fleet, in dry dock with Cassin and Downs, hit by 1 bomb and debris from USS Cassin, remained in service. Tennessee, hit by 2 bombs, returned to service February 1942. Maryland, hit by 2 bombs, returned to service February 1942. Utah, hit by 2 torpedoes, capsized, total loss, salvage stopped. Helena, hit by 1 torpedo, returned to service January 1942. Raleigh, hit by 1 torpedo, returned to service February 1942. Cassin, in dry dock with Downs in Pennsylvania, hit by 1 bomb, burned, reconstructed and returned to service February 1944. Downs, in dry dock with Cassin in Pennsylvania, caught fire from Cassin, burned, reconstructed and returned to service November 1943. Helm, underway to West Lock, damaged by 2 near-miss bombs, continued patrol, dry docked January 15, 1942, and sailed January 20, 1942. Oglala, Minor Layer, damaged by torpedo hit on Helena, capsized, returned to service, as engine repair ship, February 1944. Vestal, repair ship, hit by 2 bombs, blast and fire from Arizona, beached, returned to service by August 1942. Curtis, seaplane tender, hit by 1 bomb, 1 crashed Japanese aircraft, returned to service January 1942. Sotoyomo, harbor tug, damaged by explosion and fires in Shaw, sunk, returned to service August 1942. Chapter 10, Aftermath. The day after the attack, Roosevelt delivered his famous Day of Infamy speech to a joint session of Congress, calling for a formal declaration of war on the Empire of Japan. Congress obliged his request less than an hour later. On December 11, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States, even though the Tripartite Pact did not require it. Congress issued a declaration of war against Germany and Italy later that same day. The United Kingdom had already been at war with Germany since September 1939 and with Italy since June 1940, and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill had promised to declare war within the hour of a Japanese attack on the United States. As a result, the UK declared war on Japan 9 hours before the US did.